Okay, everybody, I need to say this. I'm freaking out. I'm so excited. Anybody who knows me knows that I like to pretend that I know psychology because I've read I've read a bunch of psychology books. If you can't see them here on the back over there, I've got a whole bunch of books that I like to read. I listen to as many podcasts and stuff. And I actually, like 7 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, I got to meet Dr. Derek Fisher from St. Mary's University. He's here with me today. Hi, Dr. Derek. How are you?
Mount St. Vincent University.
Mount St. Vincent. Oh my gosh, I said it wrong. Mount St. Vincent University here in Halifax. You have no idea. Like it was like striking gold. The fact that you came into so if you, in case anybody doesn't know, my son and I, we run Frostbite Baseball Academy here in Halifax, teaching young kids, first time players. We now have some high development players in baseball, and uh, Derek was kind enough to sign his son up, Isaac, for the course. And so he sits down and I'm like, oh, say, hey, what do you do for a living? And it's like, I'm a doctor of psychology. Oh, you're a professor of psychology? And I freaked out. And so thank you for not just kind of like turning and running in the other way. The coolest moment was like, yeah, I'll talk to you about psychology. Let's go. And I was like, yes. And then I kind of bamboozled you a little bit. And I said, hey, come talk to me on my YouTube channel. And now you're here and I'm really excited. And okay, I'll calm down now. But because I can't do it justice, I'd rather you tell everybody a little bit about you and how you got into psychology and what it is that you focus on.
Okay, yeah. So I'm how I got into so I'm a professor of psychology. I'm a full professor at the Mount in Halifax. I'm an adjunct professor in Department of Psychology and Neuroscience at Dalhousie and Department of Psychiatry at Dalhousie and in the Department of Psychology at St. Mary's. So I do sometimes supervise
Wow.
grad students at St. Mary's and at Acadia as well. My area of research is cognitive neuroscience. So I'm really interested in how the brain works. Predominantly, I'm interested in when it works differently. So I've got sort of two main arms of my research. The first looks at how the brain works in the context of psychological disorders, predominantly psychosis. So we do a lot of work examining brain-based changes in schizophrenia. We've got a project right now in collaboration with the Royal Ottawa Hospital, looking at changes in the brain in bipolar disorder in folks with and without auditory hallucinations. Just assuming if some, up to about a third to 40% of folks with bipolar are going to hear voices at some point over their illness. So is the brain different than those who don't? Because if it is, then that potentially provides a nice little treatment target. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
A tangible difference. And we know, for example, that bipolar disorders can be very, very difficult to treat.
Yeah.
So any sort of foothold we get is great. The other sort of arm of my research is looking at how drugs affect the brain. Predominantly, I've looked at more common drugs. So in my graduate training, the lab I came up through was in a psychiatric hospital, but it did have a pretty significant focus on how nicotine affects the brain and trying
Okay.
to break down exactly how nicotine does what it does. And, whether it be, testing it in folks with, say, schizophrenia or psychosis, whether it be first administering a drug that blocks dopamine transmission and then giving nicotine and seeing what's the difference versus if we don't block dopamine, to try and elaborate on how does nicotine impact that system. Where we look at caffeine, we've had a project looking at, it's a little bit more retrospective. We don't give them the drug, but looking at how cannabis use affects the brain and whether that differs in males and females. So those are sort of my two arms of research. As far as how I got into it, I mean, I've always been fascinated with brain psychology, that sort of thing. I did a Bachelor of Science in psychology at University of Ottawa, originally with the goal of going into med school. So the whole medical, clinical medicine thing
Okay.
interested me, but not as not as a clinical psychologist. And
Right.
along the way, I just sort of, medicine wasn't for me. It was it's a lot of same, a lot of sort of doing the same thing every day. And I started working in this lab that used EEG to examine brain activity. And I found that super exciting and I just never stopped.
Yeah. Oh man, that's so cool. Well, and it's interesting because we always typically start in one direction and then go find ourselves finding that one thing that might be connected, but then is completely takes you into another, world altogether, which is kind of cool. My plan in high school was, I have diabetes insipidus, which is
Okay.
fairly rare. At the time when I was diagnosed, I was 8 years old. So I'm old, 40 some odd years ago. And so I wanted to cure my disease. So I studied sciences and biology, and I thought for sure I was going to become a pediatric endocrinologist. I wanted to help young kids
Nice.
who had hormone problems. And so that was my goal. And then I didn't. Now I'm headlong into marketing. And really what I ended up doing was studying influence and how to help people make decisions. And we're not from a truly psychological standpoint, but I mean, I had to study a little bit because I had to figure out what was it that was going to help people to make a good decision, how to build trust within a communication process, what all of that stuff means. And then now I'm 52, like I said, and I work for myself as a partner of a much bigger group called the Wizard of Ads. And yeah, completely not what I know. I mean, I graduated high school and I had every science credit that I could
Yeah.
possibly have. And I really don't use any of those.
But you do, I'm sure you do, just in the sense of, science is really a process, right? It's not really a
Yes.
subject, it's a process. And it's sort of, creating hypotheses and testing those hypotheses. So even every ad campaign, you've got a hypothesis that this is going to reach people and this is going to drive sales. And then you put it into practice and you analyze the data and say either, yeah, this is great, let's do more of this, or, oh, this sort of worked, but here are some tweaks we can make, or, data says we're not.
Right. Well,
It
well,
didn't work, and so let's abandon that hypothesis that this is the way, at
well,
least for this product, right? Or this.
yeah. Well, and that's what kind of got me to where I'm at today, where I appreciate everything there because when I was working as a marketing manager for a metal stamping company, and I just want to give a little
Okay.
bit of this backstory because it's going to set up a bunch of the questions I'm going to ask you. I was working as a marketing manager, sales manager, dual role for a metal stamping company, and my role was they had created a metal roofing product and they wanted to take it to market. And when I first started with them, they didn't have anybody to champion that. And so I was like, okay, let me take on the project. And then we got ourselves from nothing, no sales, up to when I left them, I want to say $4 or $5 million in sales. But in the middle, look closer to the end, I hired the Wizard of Ads. I hired some of the marketing guys there because I wanted to get onto radio and I really didn't have any experience there. And so when I hired them, they were saying things and they were labeling things that I intuitively felt very connected to. So I would be doing certain marketing things, marketing tactics that they had labels for that I didn't know the name of, or they made labels for it. And then once I started working with them more and talking with them more, they were telling me, oh yeah, well, we've got an entire school called the Wizard Academy down in Austin, and you should definitely take some courses. And I started taking some courses because I was like, oh my God, this is the best stuff ever. And when I started doing that, first course, they pull out a brain and put it up on the big screen and they start telling you about all the areas of the brain. And that's when I went, this is scientific. This isn't
Yeah.
intuition. This is, and I'm sure intuition is a big part of it, but there was a process involved into how do you start and where do you go, and they named it all, and I was like, okay, I found my mecca. I know my home. So Roy Williams, who's the founder of the Wizard of Ads, we talk about him almost like a cult leader, but he's totally not a cult, which is a tagline down at the Wizard Academy. But he did a lot of work for us. Like he did a lot of the testing, and I'm going to try this, and try. Oh, this works every time. I'm going to continue doing this with every client, sort of thing. And then he started naming it, and then he started doing the research to back it up. So when I asked you if you would talk with me, it was because I wanted to challenge all of the things that I had learned from Roy. Because as a marketer, we have a saying, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. But everything has to be based on truth. So
Yeah.
like for us, it's like a tenement. Like we won't work with a client who wants to just rip off. Like we can use our powers for evil or powers for good. And we will never use them for evil. And so we have to take on, really awesome clients who their why is actually for the customer and for the experience, not for their pocketbook. Now, they usually correlate when you take really good care of
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
They usually reciprocate with payment. But that's where my questioning starts: is we study influence, so we practice influence, right? That's everything that marketing is. I mean, the easiest form of marketing is just talking. It's just like, hey, I have this thing. Do you want this thing? That's the beginning, right? We usually think of that as in the moment marketing or in the moment sales or in the moment buying. Google calls it the zero moment of truth, right? It's the moment when somebody decides they're going to make a purchase. And we don't believe in that. what we believe in is that the message has to be entertaining to be remembered. So a company's message about their product, like facts, like, hey, we've got this gadget. I've got a cell phone right here, and it's got a 5.5-inch screen, and it'll light up when you turn it and face you, and it'll make phone calls to your grandmother, and it'll remember her number for you. Like, those are the facts, and the facts are kind of boring. And what we do is we say, no, we're not going to tell the facts. We're going to just tell an awesome story to buy the entertainment, and then talk about one thing about how if you drop it, it won't break.
Right. You're right.
And we do this over and over and over and over again, and we get the repetition, and we do it in mass media, which we typically shy away from digital media, even though it's a necessary evil, the Google tax, we call it. So my questions are going to be based upon, we have talked off screen, so I know you've probably put some preparation into this, but there's two things that I'm really kind of curious about is, how do we build trust? What happens in the
Right.
brain, and how do we build trust?
Right.
And the second one is, what helps messaging, or what helps any information go from short-term memory to long-term memory? Because what we want is for our clients, our customers, to know that our company exists before they even need us, right? So an HVAC instance happens once every 10 or 15 years. So for 10 or 15 years, can't make everything's working perfectly, but you need to buy a new air conditioner. It doesn't work. So we need them to know, as soon as there's a problem with the air conditioner, the only one we're going to call is the person I've been hearing on the radio or watching on TV or seeing the billboards of for the last X. So let's start with trust, though, because trust is the big one for me.
Yeah.
How do we build trust?
So, I mean, it's an interesting question, right? Now, understand it's a little outside my area, but there's actually some really cool work on trust building and that sort of thing in evolutionary psychology, right? So talking about the formation of groups and that sort of thing. So there's a couple of ways that you can build trust. Number one, probably the simplest. We'll start with the easiest, and it's been shown in a number of different studies. If people find someone attractive, they're going to trust them, right? They're inclined to trust them.
Okay.
So you see this as young as like small children. If you say so who do you like most? Who do you want to share your stuff with? Because sharing is implicitly a trust exercise, right? We often share
Absolutely.
with the expectation that people are going to share back.
Yes.
And so, the faces that get rated the highest in attractiveness tend to be the ones that kids want to share with. And
Okay.
so we sort of see this go hand in hand as far as sort of easy, trust goes. Now, I suspect there's a bit of a nuance to it.
Sure.
There's probably, one of the things that you see pretty universally across psychological phenomena, we see this with drugs, we see this with everything. There's often what we call an inverted U, right? There's kind of a peak where too little is bad, too much is bad. There's somewhere in the middle, which is kind of your optimal, right?
Yeah.
Sort of like
Yeah.
caffeine. You got zero caffeine, bad. You get to, you have a couple of cups of coffee, great. But if you have 10 cups of coffee, well, you're so wired and you've got a headache and you're too much, right? So
Yes. Yes.
there's a little bit of work that sometimes it can deviate there, and then there are sort of personal experiences, but by and large, attractiveness, which is why bring it back to advertising, the whole idea of spokesmodels comes about from
Absolutely.
that, right? And attractiveness doesn't have to be. We oftentimes think about this in terms of physical attractiveness, but it could be vocal attractiveness. If someone has an attractive voice for the radio, that's going to, a voice that people want to listen to, that they want to hear, that's going to be a really easy way to build trust. By and large, people, so that's sort of one really easy way to do it. Another sort
So
of, it's a little, yeah,
maybe I'm wrong on this and I don't know, and you can let me know. But so, like, having a very attractive brand aesthetic,
yeah,
right? Wearing clean and properly pressed uniforms, if you're a service company, having a truck that is not all beat up and dirty. All of these things go to that idea of attractiveness. A company that's well put together, they obviously care about themselves. So if they care about themselves, they should care about me. I like that idea of if you behave a little bit, if you can make yourself more beautiful, which is why women, right? Women are makeup and hair and blah blah blah. Like there's to attract
but even if you
something.
think men in the ads, right? Like it may be a different type, maybe think of the Marlboro Man, right? Had the
For
chiseled
sure.
jaw, had
Yes,
the,
yes,
you
yes,
know what I
yes,
mean? Like,
yes.
so it plays into a particular, whether it's an aesthetic or some sort of thing, at least as far as building very quick, immediate, in the moment trust.
Right. So this would be a little more superficial trust.
A little bit superficial. It can be broken. It can be, it's not gonna outweigh if someone, looks like Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie, but then they're doing shady things. The attractiveness isn't going to outweigh the actions. But
Right.
as far as
Right.
like an initial, hey, nice to meet you, yeah, so
Okay.
that sort of clean put together is going to be an initial, good way to do it.
Okay. Perfect.
The other sort of way that we know that people can build trust easily is to be seen to be presenting a balanced argument, right? So if someone is presenting something only one way, right?
Okay.
Now this is, I don't know how this applies to brands, but someone who's sort of seen to be presenting a balanced argument to acknowledge that, acknowledge faults or flaws or whatever the case may be with a, obviously with an indication to do better. That is often seen as being trustworthy. So if I were making an argument to you and trying to convince you of what I'm saying, if I were to say, well, the research only shows this, this is the only way to do it, people by and large realize that's probably not the case. There are exceptions to every
Everything.
rule, right?
Yeah.
So even if it's a matter of saying, like, hey, look, there are a couple of exceptions to this. This may not work in this particular circumstance.
Right.
Acknowledging that it's not a universal one size fits all. There might be a couple of exceptions here, but 99% of the time this is going to work. Even if you acknowledge that 1%,
So
that helps
okay.
build
So
trust.
okay. So that brings me to another thought. So the idea of acknowledging that we both have value to the conversation. If that can, and again, we're not talking like we don't have enough time to talk to anybody about anything in great. Like you and I get to. This is amazing, and hopefully anybody watching and any marketers that are watching or anybody that's watching this and they're getting something from it, it's great. But we don't normally have that much time, so I always try to make it like, how do I make that into the most simplest form? And it's this. The reason why I sorry I look like I was distracted. I was going back, but
No, it's fine.
I'm almost finished reading Magic Words by Jonah Berger,
Okay, yeah.
and he references a ton of studies, psychology studies on the use of specific words and phrases and how to question. I recommend this to everybody to read this. But one of the ones, and you just brought it up, and that's what made me like I went, oh my god, I just read something on that. So the idea of acknowledging the fact that you may not have all the answers actually makes it seem like you know more than most people because you're willing to accept all sides of the argument.
Well, and you've seen enough to know, you have enough experience to know that, hey, there are
Right.
some instances, as opposed to, being a novice that like, yes, this is going to 100% work.
Right. Well, but it's funny because in that conversation, or in his explanation of it, it was you don't even need to have all of the knowledge and have gone through all the research. All you need to do is say, hey, listen, in my experience, this is what I found. So you start it this conversation that way instead of saying, this is what it is. This is the rule. We don't break it. It's like, hey, in my experience, what I found is 95% of the time, this is what we get. Even if you've done no research, but you say those words, all of a sudden you seem more trustworthy because you're acknowledging the fact that, yes, you might come up with the one weird scenario where this doesn't work.
100%. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
exactly. Right. Because everyone knows that one weird scenario. And if you pretend it doesn't exist, then either you're naive or you're lying.
You're lying. Exactly. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So those are great examples of how to build trust. The other one, and another book that I brought out just to make sure, because I finished reading this one a little while ago, is called The Moral Molecule by Paul Zak.
Okay.
And this one talks about the chemical responsible for helping us to build trust bonds, which is oxytocin. And so I thought that was, to me, that's the exciting part. It's like, okay, so this isn't just us saying, hey, listen, it'll be really nice if all you did was acknowledge the other person and then they trust you. That's not what this is all about. He talked about in this book, and I'm, again, dumbing down. So Paul, you're probably not watching ever one of my YouTube channel things, but I'm dumbing this down. Sorry, but it's the giving of trust is what gets you trust. Like offering of
Yeah, I think
yourself.
that's fair. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like so it's like mom who's constantly giving herself to the baby, that bond early on becomes very strong and very connected. And then like you said, not all bonds are perfect. They're not, there's ways to break those. And then over time that bond changes because you get a different sense from your dad or from your friends, and those bonds now start to shift and change. But it's the giving of trust that does it. And we explain it this way when I talk to a client. It's use vulnerability in your stories, because if you give up of yourself, people realize you're not trying to bewilder them, that you're actually, if you're willing to trust. A good example is, let's say, who screwed up. Okay, an air conditioning company, heating and air conditioning company, they screwed up. They put in the wrong heat pump. I see a heat pump above your head, so I'm going to use that as an example. The heat pump is wrong and it creates damage for whatever reason. And nobody wants to talk about that story. Oh my God, we don't make mistakes. Everything's perfect. You got to hire us because we're perfect. And the reality is, and we just talked about it, nothing's perfect. Oh, what we would say is, give us that story. Let us create an advertisement about what you did to fix the problem. Because acknowledge the fact that sometimes it happens. Listen, this never happens, but it did happen. This is what we did. We'll never make you, responsible for a problem like that. And it's that using of the vulnerability that allows people to go, oh man, these guys are, you know what? They're genuine. They're human.
And if the worst case happens where, I mean, even if it's not they installed the wrong thing, I mean, sometimes you get a lemon, right? It's no one's fault. It's
100%.
just,
Yes.
but knowing that they're going to, instead of trying to blame it on you or walk away from it, that they're going to be like, you know what? Yeah, that sucks. We're going to take care of it. You have that peace of mind. Absolutely. They've sort of, there's another sort of principle that's kind of related, which is the idea that humans are really attuned to, depending on the literature, it's called different things, but cheaters, basically. The people
Okay.
who are going to take more than their fair share, that are going to,
Okay.
as far as the big group goes, they're going to disproportionately take resources and not put stuff back in.
Right.
And, if you take an evolutionary psych perspective, it's sort of thought come from, where we had small groups and everyone kind of had to pitch in. And so if someone's not, carrying their share of the load, well, the whole group suffers. Whether or not that's the case, I don't know. But I think, what is pretty clear is that people are pretty well attuned to these things. So coming back to the idea of like giving yourself is a good way to build trust. It's showing that you've got this, taps into ideas of altruism. It taps into ideas of, contributing and being a partner, being there together, as opposed
Correct.
to you were there for me to extract resources from as a client, those resources being your money.
Right. Okay. So to me, that's amazing. Okay. So I love that thought process, because again, I said it earlier on. So again, it's these things where, like, when there is a label or a word for it, right? I love to learn that. And what I had said earlier was, we won't work with, a shyster. We won't work with somebody who's going to,
Yeah.
go and take, because we could potentially get them some decent cash flow early on, but they're always going to get found out. And we don't want that reputation attached to our reputation, right? So, okay, that's incredible. Very, very neat. So basically, everything I feel and I've learned about trust and been reading about trust, you're kind of acknowledging that those things are kind of all in line. Yes, there's way more science to it, but for the most part, if we behave altruistically, if we do our best to be superficially, at the very least, well put together and present ourselves well, and we behave like normal human beings behave, we can be seen as a little more trustworthy than the next guy.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. 100%. Even if it's not a matter of, a lot of companies, it's not necessarily pure altruism, right? But there has to be that part of it. It has to be that partnership. Even if that partnership is, hey, I'm going to fix this thing for you. You're going to help keep my business afloat. We're both going to benefit. So it's synergistic, right? As
Right.
opposed to, it's a synergistic relationship as opposed to a parasitic relationship.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. So that's very cool. And so I want to, for the sake of time, I want to get us into another topic, while I have you, and
Yeah.
maybe we'll do round two in a couple months if I can,
In the spring,
if I
sure.
could pick your brain. So the other one is the whole idea of how we take information from that first sort of like initial part of our memory, which is immediately we're flooded with this data and we have to use it, to where we've used it and it goes away, or we use it and it's good information and then we store it. And
Yeah.
so So I know I said when I brought this up to you, so guys, please understand, I have no problem being wrong about anything. I love to learn the real news. I talked about electrical versus chemical memory, and you were like, nope, that's not how this works, because that's how it was described to me at one point. And I haven't really delved into any good reading or podcasts about memory. So this will be great. So talk to me. I wanna be able to have information, get into the brain, and stay there to be able to be recalled when the problem exists that my service offers.
Yeah, I mean, I think first the thing, we briefly talked about this. I think one of the things that is really important to me, there, I guess there's two problems. One is sort of like a signal to noise, right? Which is how does signal break through the noise and sort of become salient and memorable and reach attention and all that sort of thing. So that's sort of
Okay.
an attention thing. But then it's the memory component, and at its simplest, and again, you can get way more complex with this, but a lot of what we sort of think about long-term memory is the connection of synapses, connections of sort of regions of the brain that hold memory together, to sort of form so that when you think of this thing, you then think of this thing, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so if you pair two ideas together over and over again, you strengthen that connection. So this comes back to the work of Donald Hebb. So Donald Hebb, originally from Chester, Nova Scotia, went to Dow, I believe, but this is this idea of Hebbian learning, which is super important in cognitive neuroscience. And put most simply, Hebb said neurons that fire together wire together. So if you continually
Okay.
activate two parts of the brain and you do it repetitively in a way that the organism thinks is meaningful, and I say organism because you get this with, it's not a unique to human thing. You can do this with insects. You can do this with other mammals,
Dogs. Yeah.
dogs,
Yeah.
absolutely. Neurons that fire together wire together. And so it sort of comes back to this idea of neural networks, right? So we have within our brain, and so these semantic networks, right? So if we want to think about words or concepts or ideas that we have, it doesn't exist on an island. That word or concept then is linked to other ideas or words. So if I say cat, well, you might think mouse, you might think meow, you might think there's a whole bunch of other sort of related concepts.
Cucumber comes to mind when I hear cat, because they're really afraid of
But
cucumbers, right?
that's a really great example, right? Because for a lot of people, if they haven't seen those videos, if you were to say cat is related to cucumber, they would be like one is not green, one is definitely green, one is
Yeah, one's soft
a
and fuzzy, the other
fruit,
one's cold and hard. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And so because, for people who have seen those videos where cats are afraid of cucumbers, presumably because they look like snakes, um, then all of a sudden, then those two concepts are now linked, right?
Right,
And so as
right.
far as creating that linkage between those two concepts, there's kind of two ways to go about it. One is to sheer the blunt force approach, which is just sheer repetition. This is often what's used in school. You present, two concepts together over and over and over and over and over again, or you make it salient. You increase that emotional valence, because as soon as you can put emotion on something, it helps strengthen those connections. And
That's
so for someone who
beautiful.
sees that and thinks that's hilarious, and they have that emotional response to it, that's going to become it. They probably don't need to see it more than once. They've seen it once, they go, wow, that is wild.
Yes.
They have some sort of, whether it be pity for the cat, whether it be this is super funny, and so that connection is formed. And then the more they're exposed to it, the more it's going to get strengthened. And if it's no longer used, then it's going to weaken, right? So it might
Right.
form initially, but you've probably heard this with language or instruments or whatever. If you don't use it, you lose it. And
Yes.
that's absolutely true, because it is, all of a sudden then those neurons, there's finite amount of, connections, tons and tons of connections they can make, but still relatively finite. And if they're not using a connection, well, that connection might be better spent connecting elsewhere.
Right.
So those
Right.
connections will weaken. So all of a sudden the link between those two concepts is going to
Well,
weaken.
that's no different than what we do with Isaac with baseball training, right? It's if you notice that and it's funny again, it's all these things where for some reason instinctually I've been able to do these things, and I just love labeling and putting things together. Is I get really loud, or I make a joke, or I do something silly, or I say something that is completely not related, right? So if I want somebody to hit with power, and what I need them to do is engage their core. When I say engage your core, kids are like, huh? Yeah. Or if I say, okay, that feeling right before you fart, and your
Yeah.
stomach is
Yeah. Yeah.
pushing out. And
Yeah.
then they giggle because fart jokes are funny to a 12-year-old. Now all of a sudden they can connect. Okay, great. Every time I swing, now I got to feel like I'm going to fart, which then I can, over time, train them to understand is engaging your core so they can do their motion, right? So that makes perfect sense to me. It's also I'm going to run for 2 seconds here. One of the earliest concepts that I learned at the Wizard Academy was bringing the familiar to the unfamiliar. So linking two things that aren't normally linked together makes you remember the one that's unfamiliar easier and faster and longer, because this thing's really familiar to me. So, and you keep saying it in line with this. So next time you say this, I'm going to feel what I felt with this.
100%. You're basically just from that thing that they're using often, that they're very familiar with. You're basically creating that node, that connection
Yes.
to something that they didn't know. You're strengthening that connection. You're just expanding that sort of semantic network, that network
Okay.
that goes along
Brilliant.
with it.
Okay, that's cool. So you said a couple of things which I really like. So when we buy media, so this is a kind of an interesting topic, is when we buy, let's say, radio or television, we buy it for a specific amount of frequency. And so that repetition of the same person hearing or seeing your ad is what, even if you didn't have an amazingly, alien or exciting ad or emotional ad, even just that repetition, you're going to live somewhere in the brain. I don't know where it's going to be, but you're going to live there somewhere with enough repetition. Like you said, in schools, they kind of do it. It's not necessarily always engaging.
Through, though, right? So long as it cuts
right,
through,
you have to break through the rest
it.
of the noise. Right. Stephen Semple, one of my partners, famously is he's now talking on TEDx stages, and he's talking about 3,000 Skittles. He has this demonstration with 3,000 Skittles, and that's the amount of, back in 2015 was where he got his number, but that's about as many marketing messages as we're exposed to as human beings in a day.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And the next day, and I'm quoting somebody who's quoting somebody else who did some science, that the next day we're possibly going to remember 2 of those messages.
Yeah.
Because for what you just said, you have to be able to, repetition only works if you break through the noise. And so that's where the second part of what you said was saliency comes in. So being emotionally driven is always going to do a better job to help that repetition just drill the pathway of memory for the thing that we want you to know, to remember and we're using the entertainment to do that. And I quoted this to you yesterday because I was coaching your son last night, and I quoted this line, which is, and this is a Roy H. Williams quote, is entertainment is the currency we use to buy the time and attention of a distracted consumer, a busy and distracted consumer. And so I love that I didn't say this first on the video. I haven't led you down this path. You brought the science and you said this is the way it works. And we're like, oh my God, Roy, all of the things Roy's been studying and now teaching through the academy were on point. There is one though. I've got about 10 minutes, roughly, a little less than 10 minutes left. I want to talk about Broca's area for a second.
Sure. Let's talk about Broca's area.
And you and I now, because I said something and you're like, maybe, in our little passing conversations over the last little bit. So we describe Broca's area in the Wizard of Ads in a very simplistic format, because the brain is way too complex for us to verbalize in a 1 sentence, 2 sentence thing. And we've broken Broca's area down into being the bodyguard of the brain so that we don't get distracted by everything that's happening. And we know now that it's not the one thing. It's Broca's area then gets a whole bunch of things to do its job and blah, blah, blah. But can you explain to me how we ignore things that are common, like information that is no longer relevant, but yet it's there? But that stimulus, we just we can drive home and not even remember we got home. If we see a billboard and it doesn't change and it's the same billboard that we don't even see it. We know we saw it, like we're paying attention for danger, so we know it's out there in the periphery of our brain.
Or you don't, actually. You may not.
See, this is okay, let's talk about this.
So just real quick, Broca's area is really involved in speech planning. It doesn't really have
planning.
It doesn't really have a whole lot to do with attentional modulation.
Okay, so let's fix this.
So the famous case is, understand, getting to my personal little favorite thing, Broca actually didn't really discover it. Someone else kind of pointed out that if you had damage to frontal lobes, then, and someone else previously shown left side, then you would actually have massive speech deficits. And Broca, people kind of laughed at it. It was Ernest Aubertin in France. And Paul Broca said, well, I got someone and all they can say is tan. Literally, the only thing they can say is tan. Oh, they could swear a little bit too. And like, so if you're right, like let's, when he dies, let's cut him open and let's do an autopsy on the brain and let's see if you're right. And Aubertin was like, yeah, I mean, if I'm wrong, I will publicly say I'm an idiot, essentially. And Tan eventually died. They cut him open. Huge, we call it a lesion, but basically a massive hole in his brain, left frontal lobe. If you say Broca and Tan and brain, you'll see like this brain. So it's more involved in speech planning. So that's just my personal.
Oh, thank
Adding a
you.
little
Listen,
context.
it's good.
So when we're thinking then though of attention, there's a couple of things that are at play here. Part of it's going to be our prefrontal cortex, which is involved in executive function, which is planning, which is approach, which is ignoring and all that. But at the simplest sensory level, a lot of it's going to be thalamus, right? So we've got this area, we've actually got two thalami, one in each hemisphere, deep in the brain, and all of our senses essentially run through thalamus. They often have pathways that bypass it as well, but essentially they run through thalamus, except for scent or olfactory nerves.
Okay.
Bypass thalamus, which is why scent can kind of bypass attention. But anyways,
Okay.
thalamus is, if you want sort of a good sort of metaphor for it, it's one of the old switchboard operators, right? Saying, yes, I'm going to plug this call through, so we're going to let this information come through. Nope, we're not going to do that. And so what we would see, for example, is, if for many of us, we have a parent that back in the days of newspapers, my dad, if he was reading the newspaper, the world ceased to exist. Like a herd of elephants could come running through, but his thalamus was gating out everything.
Right.
Equally, we know folks with ADHD have an underactive thalamus, which is why more stuff comes through than it should, which is why stimulants work, right? Because stimulants are going to actually stimulate thalamus to allow them to gate out the things they don't want and only allow in the things that they want to pay attention to. So that's
okay.
So that's part of it, right? Is that's at a sensory level, and then at a big picture level, you get into things like, well, if you see something and it's relevant to you, whether or not you've been told to look for something, or whether it plays into your personal history, your personal interests, tapping into your memory of something that you've seen that is already interesting and relevant to you, then there's sort of interplay there. So thalamus needs to sort of get some guidance from somewhere, and a lot of it's going to be what are our current goals, what are our current motivations, but also what are our interests, what's our history. And so something that taps into our memory that we think is important is going to be allowed to kind of pass through. So
is that okay? So is that how? And this is way off topic, and it can be a very quick answer. Is that how confirmation bias works?
Confirmation bias a little different, to a certain extent, because those arguments that are aligned with what we think, yeah, they're gonna cut through the noise better, right? We're gonna like, oh, well, it looks like I was right because we all like being right.
Yeah, I heard the first sentence of that whole argument, and I agree with you.
I agree with you. Whereas the stuff that is, that gets into things like sort of, our personal appraisal and that sort of thing, and the fact that the brain is always trying to be efficient, right? So
Yes.
it's more efficient to find the things that confirm your hypothesis than to seek out all the potential alternative hypotheses and rule them out one by one. So something that's just going to be like, oh yeah, we're right. We're basically job done. We can move on to the next thing. Our brain loves that. Our brain loves being efficient like that. So yeah, anyway, so we see that, but I mean, just coming back to the sensory thing, we did a study where the paper is we've got we're in the process of finalizing it to submit it, but we did this interesting study looking at gambling imagery in gamblers, right? So we had them look at, these are folks who had experienced gambling, but none of them were problem gamblers, right? They were just people who had been to a casino, they'd played some cards, they'd bought some scratch tickets, whatever the case may be.
Okay.
And we looked at brain response to images of, it was mostly stuff from a casino. It was replicating a study done in Germany.
Okay.
And what we found was we were looking for sort of this brain-based marker called LPP, positive potential, that sort of shows emotional valence, that they were going to like love it or like have really strong emotional feelings about it. We didn't really get anything there, but we found this marker called the P300. So P300 is a marker of target detection. It's like one of the most commonly studied brainwaves out there. You type P300 into Google Scholar, you will get tens, if not hundreds of thousands of papers.
Okay.
But for the folks who had more gambling experience, they actually had a significant P3 to the gambling imagery. Even though they weren't told to do anything, they weren't told, it was just showing up amongst other images that were popping up here and there. And so that sort of suggested that for folks who gamble more, that was cutting through the noise and their brain was attracted to it. It was paying more attention to it. It was treating it like a target based on their personal experience, based on their personal history.
Hey, so okay, hang on. That's kind of interesting. So, one of the directors or board members of the Wizard Academy, and I think he's still on the board. He may not be, but he was for a very long time. And Dice, he started digital marketer like way back when. He's been doing a lot of studies and research into how to use digital marketing, right? So how to use social media marketing, how to cut through the noise. And so he spends a lot of time to try and help people develop or to sell to businesses the ability to break through social media noise, which is, we know, like drinking, drinking from a fire hose out of a teacup. It's just, you can't hold all that data, right? So to cut through that noise would be really keen. Facebook, and again, I'm quoting other people who I was not at the course. One of my partners, Gary Bernier, was, and he's talking about affinity group marketing. And so what happens is that Facebook just started realizing that, if I chose the targets that I want as a lay human, I'm going to get it wrong because I don't know who actually is going to buy my product. I'm just praying and spraying, or spraying and praying. I want everybody needs to hear it, and I hope that it's going to work. And in social media terms, it's just white noise. It's just like scroll, I'm not interested, scroll, not interested. Hey, a funny cat video being scared by a cucumber, scroll, right? So to break through that noise is, and you just said something fantastic, is what Facebook has started to do is they don't give you the ability to target on your social media advertising anymore. What you can do is you can talk to an affinity group. So a good example would be if you wanted to get more golfers to go into your podiatry clinic so they could, continue to walk 18 holes instead of limping them, then you're going to write an ad campaign, or should be writing an ad campaign that uses golfing references. And then what Facebook's doing is it's only throwing it in front of people who have said, hey, I'm a golfing person, I like to golf. And then they show up more often and they get more clicks because that's how Facebook makes money.
100%. I mean, you look who's following the golfing pages, who, I know it's even as some of these algorithms are so sensitive now that it's, as they're scrolling through, if something golf comes up, who pauses, you're scrolling through, oh no, I'm going to hold on. They paused for a couple of seconds that just to get a sense of what they like. But yeah, no, if you get something like that and you're talking about something for that group, that's the ultimate kind of precision marketing, right? To do that. Whereas people have been doing that for ages, right? When you think about ads that, I'm thinking the Molson Canadian ads that talk about hockey or whatever beer ad, or they don't run that in Brazil. They run it in Canada. Because hockey cuts through the noise for a significant proportion of folks.
Absolutely.
If you go down into, Southern US, it's probably going to be revolving around baseball or football, right? If you're doing using sports or that sort of a thing. So it's that they're trying to tap into, whether it's memories or where people's motivations lie to cut through the noise, using that almost like a foot in the door.
Rolex does this brilliantly. Rolex, they have Rolex, obviously well-known watch brand. It's kind of this self-identification timepiece, right? Like, I identify as somebody who deserves a Rolex, and that's how they market to their people. And they've done it brilliantly, and I'm not throwing any shade. I don't own a Rolex. I don't live in that space. But they captured their market very well by creating full-on books. Like I'm talking like thick books, like this big, and they have them available at all the jewelry stores that, you can go on and order your book. And it's for the aviator. They have a book about flying.
Okay.
Okay, so and it's like, and they spend a lot of money producing these books. Like they follow like every kind of aviation, and then they have one for the what was it called? It's a book all about sailing, right? And so if I'm a sailor, if I'm like, and they follow like the regattas, and then and they talk, they go and interview all those. So it's they take down to the nuanced affinity group, like the very nuanced, and they have a book for all of these people, and then they have a watch that matches that affinity group. So I want the aviator because I'm a flying person, and they've got
And
the
then
aquatic
fellow
one.
aviators will see me wearing this and know I'm one of them.
I'm one of them. I align myself with you, and they've done that in such a good way. And their watches, God bless me for saying it, are known to not necessarily be the absolute best timepieces, but they are the sought after timepieces.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You think about if they were to try to sell by facts versus sell by emotion.
Yeah. Oh no,
Right?
absolutely. There's way better watches out there, but when you think luxury watch, for most people, Rolex is the first name that comes to mind.
Right? I mean, you were talking like a $10,000. It's half of anybody's. Actually, it's probably the cost of most people's first vehicle. It gets them
Yeah.
back and forth to make more money. These people are spending on a watch. So, okay, well, this has been, I mean, Eric, brilliant for me. Like, this is so much fun. And if you are willing, I'd love to do this again. And I can pick up a whole bunch of different like things that we want
Let's
to
do
talk
this again
about.
in the spring.
Yeah, would you mind?
Yeah, yeah, that's great.
Gosh. Okay. So everybody, thank you so much for watching Derek Fisher. He is incredible. Oh my God. And at the beginning, and I wanted to say at the beginning, but I let you do your thing. You are involved in 4 schools here in one way or
Yeah, I mean,
another.
I just supervising grad students. It's only one of
Well,
them pays me.
I just supervise grad students. It's just this little thing where I'm shaping the minds of future thought leaders. Whatever. Anyway, I really appreciate you taking the time. I know your time is important, and as soon as this link is up, I'm going to share it with you. Listen, everybody, if you like this stuff, leave me a comment. Ask what questions do you want to know about science, and we'll just put a whole bunch of questions together for Dr. Derek, and we can go from
Yeah,
there.
great.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, bye now.